Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I am your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and for today's episode, we're going to be discussing MLMs. Yes, multi-level marketing. Is there a dark side behind MLMs? Well, to help me with this episode is our special guest, Brandie Hadfield, who's going to be sharing with us her recruitment story, her experiences, the dark side that she saw, the manipulation, the pressure, all of that, but also she'll be sharing with us her truth, her growth, how she got out of the MLMs, and we'll also be discussing the culty side of MLMs. So I hope you enjoy this interview, and at the end on the show notes, I'll be leaving some links so you can check out more information about Brandie Hadfield. Enjoy the episode. And today we have special guest Brandie Hadfield. Brandie, welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so cool to have you on the show. And before we even get started, can you share a bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I am located in Toronto, Canada, and for the better part of a decade, I was heavily involved with a commercial cult, also known as a multi-level marketing or a network marketing company. And I'm also a mom of two. And since leaving the cult, I went back to school to study to become a psychotherapist. And this September, I will actually be starting supervision as a student therapist. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also working on kind of a commercial cult recovery handbook slash memoir. So that's what I'm up to right now.
I can't wait to see your book.
Thank you.
Well, to get started, you mentioned that it's a MLM,
Mhm.
multi-level marketing, but you also mentioned cult. Can you briefly explain why you make that connection?
Yeah. So I actually kind of hit a burnout wall partway through the pandemic. And I decided I needed to take a month off of social media. And in doing that, I had no idea that I would end up realizing that I was in a cult, but that's what happened. So I uh, went through a, a depression and started to think, hey, I can do what I want. I can read what I want. I can watch what I want. Like there was like this period of, wait a second, I have time to follow wherever because you're kept so busy and you're prescribed so much activity and action and reading material and video material that kind of being freed from that, found myself really drawn to reading memoirs and documentaries. And then I ended up eventually watching The Vow. And as I was watching The Vow, I was really struck with how similar the Nexium cult was to what I'd been involved in. And then I started listening to the podcast a little bit culty, and I was just learning so much. And then that's when the connection of multi-level marketing is a commercial cult. I then read a book called Ponzi-nomics, which is also explores that connection. I got introduced to Janja Lalich and read Take Back Your Life and Bounded Choice and Stephen Hassan's work. And I realized there's a playbook that they follow, which is the same strategy of recruitment and retention and exploitation that is in any type of cult. And at one point, because I wasn't brought up in a religious household. So there was the first time I ever was introduced to any sort of religious ideas was during my involvement in this commercial cult. And and that aspect of it fills a void for sure. But when I left, I thought, spirituality and religion aren't inherently bad, although I feel that these ideas were weaponized and used for profit, which isn't good. But I wanted to learn more about that part of it. So I took a course through the Lalich Center all about religion, and people were coming from all different types, like doomsday cults, political cults, like every type, and also commercial cults. And then in that class, the professor asked us, what was the single story that your group told you that turned what you were doing into a mission? And it was the biggest aha moment where I realized that we all believed that the world was in danger and we had the solution. And that was such a huge light bulb for me. Like, wow, 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 wow. I took that 30-day, well, it was to be a 30-day screen fast with my family. That was what the intention was originally. But then what ended up happening is after 30 days, I was like, I can't go back. I can't go back. I don't know what's wrong with me. And I started to think something was wrong with me. And my upline affirmed that and said, it sounds like you're depressed.
Upline, can you explain what
Upline.
that is?
Yeah. So the structure of every cult is hierarchical. So you have the person who enrolls you, who is called your upline, and they might interchangeably be called your mentor or a business partner. And then they have the person who enrolled them and the person who enrolled them. So you have your upline and your upline and your up, and it continues on. Could be quite far up the chain. And these people function as authorities, which are, this is something that I think is unique with the commercial cult is I think in many, and I'm not a cult expert, but what I've learned is that it seems that there's one person in charge, like one leader, but in the commercial cult, there are many, and they have different personalities and strategies and flavors to them, and they're kind of dispensed to you, all hierarchical, all in a position of power over you, but different types for different situations. So you then feel like you're kind of subservient to many different people.
Did you become an upline to others?
I was, yes. And that's where they say the victim becomes the perpetrator. And one of the things that is explained as one of the secrets to success, and it sounds so crazy when I say it now, because it's like certain ideas at their face just are absurd. But if you've been first love bombed and ingratiated and wooed first, then some of these ideas that at face value seem absurd, you're more willing to accept them. So one of those things is duplication. Because when you're recruited, you're not told you're going to be an automaton robot that's just behaving in this very prescribed way. You're painted a picture of a life of freedom, the complete opposite of being an automaton. So you're believing that you are achieving freedom and choice, a life by design, but then while believing that, you're also told the key to success is duplication. So you want to duplicate and you want to be duplicatable, meaning don't be too creative, don't color out of the lines too much, because that's not attainable or duplicatable in the people that you're enrolling. So it becomes this very rigid structure of behavior and yeah.
What was your enrollment, your recruitment story like?
How did I get in?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I loved to believe that I chose them and that it was my idea. And that is the story that I would tell because I was searching, I was looking for something.
Okay.
However, the reality was that I was in a funnel, and it's really helpful for a cult group to have a person thinking that it was their choice to join the group. So I think that narrative really served them well.
Mhm.
But I had actually, as a first-time mom, so I had a baby in 2011. I had been uh, in a with a company for almost a decade, and it was quite a demanding job. And I thought that I wanted something with more flexibility as a new mom. So I was, but we in Toronto is very expensive to live. So I was looking for a way to bring in some extra money. If I could go back in time, I would say just babysit or work part-time in customer service or something really simple. You had been so far ahead. But I thought, I took a class or took a course to become a certified family health coach. And I took a lot of parenting certifications because that was my passion at the time. I was very interested in being the best parent that I could possibly be and learning everything I possibly could about parenting, um, and nutrition. And I just wanted to do the best that I could. And then I thought, this is my passion. Maybe I could turn this into my career as well. So, in doing so, what I didn't realize is by enrolling in this health coaching certification, I was in a funnel for an MLM.
Mm.
And the figurehead whose name is kind of attached to this certification, a member of their family who is in this MLM, as are they, uh, sent me a letter in the mail saying that, as a health coach, to have a product is a great tool in your toolkit. That's how it was kind of pitched to me. So at the time, there was multi-level marketing was pretty big in my area. There were people in my building who were doing Arbonne and doing different things. And there's like this, I think most people feel a little bit of like a cringe factor
Mm.
when they first hear about MLM. And this is why I think it's so important to bring awareness to this topic, is because like there's something inside you that's like, this is off, but you don't fully. I just thought it was because, well, it just seems too good to be true. And selling to your friends and family, that kind of sucks. Those are like the two things.
Yeah.
If I had a known to look out for, like the whole psychological manipulation that takes place, the lack of boundaries, the enmeshment, and how they recruit and retain, it would have been different. I didn't know what I was looking at, basically. So when I met with her, I on a call, I wasn't prepared for what was going to come next and how I would feel like, wow, she's actually really nice. I actually trust her. Well, she's smart. Her father's a famous doctor, you know.
So initially, did you genuinely fall in love with the products?
The script that we were trained to use, and it's funny how it's still like the programming is still in there. It made sense. we were we'd hear that repeatedly, like when there was a script for sharing your story and it was like da 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 blank, fill in your personal details, da 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 da. So I first heard about the product, the company, from blank, and it made sense to me because blank. So when you said, did you fall in love with the product, it made sense to me because it filled a gap.
It was like the stars aligned, sort of.
That's exactly what it felt like. And that's why, again, like when Sarah Edmondson tells her story of how she got into Nexium, and it just felt like serendipity, like it was meant to be, the stars aligned. That's exactly how I felt as well. And that right there, that idea, that feeling that it was like kismet, it starts the sunk costs. You don't want to be wrong about that. It feels so good.
And the stars aligned, but when did the stars come falling down?
Well, I really appreciate the metaphor that Janja Lalich talks about the shelf, and there's things that you put on the shelf. And my husband actually suggested that I should have a chapter in my book about all of the things that I put on the shelf, because what ends up getting you out isn't necessarily like the worst thing that ever happened. It's just that point where the shelf breaks. And so a lot of things happened along the way. Like I was just uh, speaking on a different podcast yesterday about during the pandemic and how there was all of this, like rhetoric of that our products would basically prevent or cure COVID.
Mhm.
And they were just very slimy and sleazy about how they would say it without saying it. That's what they were saying. And you believe that, you're like, wow. And it also incites a fear in you where you're like, if I ever during such a scary time, if like I could, this is my life preserver.
Mhm.
Um, but then my upline got very sick with COVID. And it was like that was one of those things where it's like, but I thought that we we were taking the best thing in the planet that was protecting our immune system. And then all of this, all of these alternative treatments and everything. And I'm like, this is just isn't lining up with the idea of, getting all of our medicine through food and,
Mhm.
you know, but it was during the pandemic when, like I said, my husband works in the film industry, so the whole film industry was shut down. So he was off work and I was working harder than ever. And I was so, so busy and there were no boundaries. And I just completely burnt out and it was feeling like, okay, the whole reason I started this was to be a present mother, and I don't feel like I'm there for my kids. We just need to like take a month and reconnect. That was the beginning of the end. But it took 2 years from that point for me to actually officially resign because it took a long time to figure out exactly why I felt this way, to realize I wasn't crazy,
Mhm.
um, and to figure out my exit strategy and figure out how to leave safely and all that.
Prior to our interview, you mentioned something which I haven't really heard of, and that is cult hopping.
Mhm.
Can you kind of explain what that is? And was I call hopping?
Potentially. Well, yeah, I think that was what happened because when you I mean, depending on your level of involvement in a cult, if you go all in like you're encouraged to do, then it becomes your whole world and those are your people and your family. And that's why the exit strategy can be so challenging is because you're having to start all over again. You may have really alienated yourself from people outside the group. And now you have to start all over again. And it can leave you feeling, even though you were part of something destructive, it can leave you feeling really isolated, um, and alone. And you're wanting to we're designed to be in community. So when we're looking for community, unfortunately, the ones that are going to be the most eager to have you and in your face and available are going to be like a multi-level marketing
Mhm.
company that looks so does such a expert job at the attraction marketing and painting this picture of this happy life. So I think, and even within, it's very common in multi-level marketing to think, oh, it was just that company, and then go into another multi-level marketing company and another one and another one. And famously, many people will join many companies and not realize that they all share the same playbook. It's just slightly different. One might be more evangelical, one like uh Enagic might be more new age, but they all have these common traits and this magical thinking in common. Believe it, and it will be so. That keeps you in this delusional, like the only way I can lose is if I quit, so I got to just keep doubling down, keep doubling down. And they're all weaponizing relationships. They all say it's a relationship business, which is, I now know, no business should be. That's for one thing, it's a relationship scam. And for another, one of the things as any professional who is working with people, one of the first things you learn is that dual relationships and lack of boundaries are harmful. It's psychologically dangerous. And that's exactly what they encourage is enmeshment and codependency. So if you don't know that, it can be very alluring, seductive, and entrap you could consume your whole life.
How often does that happen where people get recruited because of love?
Yeah. I think there's so much pressure to build your team that I think when, they tell you you need to have a why that makes you cry. They really want you to connect to like your deepest, most painful vulnerability and use that as your anchor. And when they're weaponizing your deepest vulnerability against you, you're going to do things that your common sense brain would tell you isn't a good idea. And that may include very unethical recruiting, such as what you experienced. So I'm sorry that you went through that. Unfortunately, I don't think it's uncommon. I think people will do pretty unscrupulous things when they are conditioned and brainwashed to do so, and that it is, they're literally like, it's like the ends justify the means. I'm gonna use whatever I need to do to hook him in, but it's okay because actually he's going to be so much better for it. He's going to meet this great community, and you know.
Have you learned any tools that help in the recovery for people who are leaving an MLM?
The very first thing that I started to do, like I was looking for like a recovery blueprint, and that's part of why I started writing this book because um you want, we're so attracted to black and white, and that's part of what gets us hooked into these groups is it pretends to have all the answers. And then you leave and you're like, but like what, how do I feel better? And it wasn't so clear cut. So I think the recovery process looks different for everyone. But for me, I think one of the first things is remembering who you are, like detangling from the pseudo self, like the cult identity that you once were. That's hard. So that's why I like Jan Lalich book, because that kind of has some of that blueprint, like how do I get back into the workforce and things like that. For me, it was writing. Not everybody's a writer, but I just started a Word document and I just started writing just as if nobody's watching. And actually, my very best friend that I've been best friends with since second grade, she at the same time had left a 20-year marriage. So her and I together kind of started this project where we just had like a shared Word document and we were just writing essays about who we are, who are we, how did we get here? And that was a beautiful catharsis because it was recovering together with someone that I really, really trust, that I know would love me unconditionally and that I'm not afraid to be myself in front of. And then, fun fact, she ended up self-publishing a book of poetry about ending a 20-year marriage. Ooh. So reconnecting with who you are and the safe people in your life that will love you no matter what. And hopefully there are relationships there. Hopefully there are people who, for me, another thing was I had to have an amends process, like the moral injury of perpetuating something that I realized was so destructive and harmful. I felt like I needed to make that right and make amends for that. So that was a huge part of my recovery. But not everybody wants an apology because some people are still in and still think that it's a good thing. So that was very difficult for me to navigate. So what I ended up doing was I kind of published on the internet an open letter to my team so that it's there. If you are curious, it's there, but I'm not going to force anybody to read it because not everybody's ready to hear it. I think that the biggest part of recovery is just remembering who you are. And that's why getting offline was also important so that I could hear myself think again and hear my intuition again and hear the wisdom within me. And that's how I realized that, wait a second, I was meant to be a therapist. That's what I always wanted to do. I got derailed for 10 years. So, and yeah, the boundaries too. Like being in my school environment was a corrective psychological experience for me because the boundaries were so professional and so clear. And then I realized how important that is and how power can be abused.
Well, now you're involved in bringing awareness. Can you share why is it important for you to be doing so?
There is a stigma attached to joining any type of cult or even the word cult. And part of the stigma is this belief that, oh, you have to be naive to join something like that, which isn't true. Anybody who studies it knows that the most intelligent, educated person can join any variety, any type of cult, which makes it so tricky because that whole relationship business, you're like, well, they're so educated. They wouldn't steer me wrong. Um, I think anybody who has left a cult can retrospectively look back and think what was happening in my life at that time. And while I might be a very smart person, um, I think 100% of the time there's some sort of transition or some sort of something where they're either seeking or looking for something or feeling isolated because they're in a time of transition and they want community for themselves. For me, it was becoming a mom. When you become a parent for the first time, you can have like an identity crisis. We don't live in a village. There isn't this, village mentality in our society, especially in the city. Um, and also, while a very smart person can and does join, I also think that it's important to point out that neurodivergence is 100% exploited. For me, I have ADHD, which I got diagnosed after I left. And part of that is this need for validation, this low self-esteem. And so getting this attention and this love bombing, it's addictive.
Yes.
So I want to bring awareness to that because also when, they so they so go after people who are, not only highly educated people, but also people who are vulnerable, who are on welfare or diagnosed with a mental illness. And I saw it happen in my group, and I know it happens in all of them. And that pisses me off. So I think that that's important to bring awareness to. Or if you're just a person who's like, I am a person who sees the good in everyone, and maybe you could say I'm more like glass half full. Um, I make my decisions based on my feelings and my intuition. And some people might say that's naive, but some people could say that that's a beautiful trait that is taken advantage of. So that's another part. And also, a big reason is coercive control can take many forms. And that's what I really want people to know. Like when in Canada, they're passing a bill to criminalize coercive control. But when they talk about it, it's more like domestic violence situations, which is wonderful that that's being addressed. That's something that I would love to do at some point is give back to a woman's shelter or, something like that. But also, coercive control can look like financial abuse with a big smile on your face, not even realizing that it's happening to you, and self-blame for the abuse that is happening. And then leaving feeling ashamed and feeling vulnerable to fall into the next group that invites you in. And if I can add about that shame aspect, I think why that is with commercial cults specifically is because it is so baked into our culture and because of the government lobbying and the history behind the quote unquote industry, it's so normalized that this is just like as American as apple pie kind of thing. And there's a really wonderful blog post by Robert L. Fitzpatrick, who wrote the book Ponzinomics, and it's called Wounded Souls. And in the post, he talks about how he noticed that people who leave multi-level marketing / network marketing / commercial cults, which is what they should just be referred to as, often will say, but I learned some great lessons, or, they try to kind of put a positive spin on it as a defense of the soul, he calls it, because to really face the damage can be hard. But he's like, imagine you got, held up and robbed. You would be angry. And part of the healing includes being justifiably angry and processing it with the appropriate emotions that the situation calls for, instead of sugarcoating it and self-blaming and like, well, I attracted this into my life, so I called it in, so I had to, no. You were lured into something that was exploitative, and it wasn't right. It was unethical, and you have a right to be pissed off. So, yeah. If I can help other people be justifiably pissed off, I think that ultimately really helps you move on.
Well, thank you so much for all that you've shared. I've heard so much truth, so much wisdom in this conversation. And if you have any links, or handles, would you like to share them?
Sure. So I write on Substack, and my handle on both Substack and Instagram is Brandie Hadfield, which is Brandie with an IE and Hadfield with a D. And those are the two channels that I'm creating on.
And when will your book be released?
Oh, I do not know. I'm like, it'll come when it comes. I had a goal for myself to finish it this summer, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Okay, well, we'll be waiting, and I'll be happy to share that once that's released.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'll come back on when it's ready.
So thank you so much, Brandie. And for those who are listening, go check out Brandie Hadfield on Substack and on Instagram.